There are places in history that exist not in the din of battles or the grandeur of palaces, but in the quiet spaces between them. Places where time seemed to move slowly, where footsteps echoed softly, and the smallest human actions had great significance. Greetings, my connoisseurs of evening stories. Tonight we set off for one such place. We step into the world of the Silk Road, but not into the noisy caravan markets filled with the shouts of merchants and the jingling of coins, not into the dazzling city gates or the colorful bazaars painted with bright silks. Instead, we go to its quieter corners, post offices, quiet offices, stops along the endless road. Imagine the world a century ago. A road stretching across deserts, mountains, and grassy plains. Some parts were scorching with heat, others were sharp with cold winds. Countless travelers traveled this route, merchants, scholars, messengers, pilgrims, carrying not only goods, but also stories, letters, and messages. And to keep this vast network of human movement connected, there were the Silk Road post offices. The quiet workings of these places rarely make it into the history books. Yet without them, the Silk Road could not function. For trade requires trust, and trust is often conveyed by letters. Promises written, seals pressed into wax, agreements transmitted hundreds of miles. Even word from family to distant son or from a court official to his superior depended on these silent institutions. Such is the pace of history tonight. Unhurried. Slow, like the footsteps of a camel caravan in the twilight. We will wander through these forgotten post offices not to uncover great mysteries, but to notice details that are so easily overlooked. The texture of the clay walls, the faint smell of ink, the silence, broken only by the occasional clatter of hooves or the creak of wooden doors. Perhaps as we wander through these places, you will find solace in their simplicity. Life here was monotonous, predictable, almost monotonous. A message delivered, a seal broken, another rider passed away. Its rhythm is like breathing, inhale, exhale, over and over again. These institutions existed to keep the great world breathing, never breaking its flow. After all, the Silk Road post offices are not just about messages. They are about communication. They are about the human desire to overcome distances, to convey a thought further than a voice can carry. They are about trust in the invisible, that a message sent today might be received weeks or months later, faithfully delivered by people you will never meet. There is a quiet beauty in this trust, a fragile thread that holds the world together. And now let's begin. Slowly, calmly, without rushing. We will step through the doors of one of these stations. We will hear the silence inside and let the story unfold at its own steady pace. Before we do, I would like to ask you something simple. If you find solace in such a journey, if these quiet wanderings into the past help you rest, I invite you to subscribe to this channel, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments. It is a small way to keep this tender exchange alive, just as letters once united the Silk Road. Now let's enter the first station together. The night awaits, and the story is ready to begin. The sun had not yet risen over the endless wave of sand dunes that cradled the desert station. Shadows stretched long and cool across the fine-grained earth, and the night air still clung to the bricks of the post office like a veil. It was a quiet place, not marked on any modern map, nestled between two crumbling cliffs just beyond a long stretch of the southern Silk Road. The travelers who came here often did so in silence, and the horses, tired and sun-drenched, seemed grateful to stop. The building itself was modest, square, low, with thick mud walls baked solid by centuries of sun. A flat roof gathered the early light, while narrow slits for windows allowed just enough air to pass through. Around its perimeter, the desert had curled in like a sleeping cat, softening its edges with drifts of ochre dust. Inside, the scribe was already awake. He moved slowly, deliberately, his fingers cracked with ink and age. He wore a long robe of faded indigo cotton and sat hunched before a wide wooden table. Everything on the table had a place. The inkstone, worn smooth with use, the delicate brushes trimmed by his own hand, the scrolls wrapped in oilskin to keep the dust at bay. With the discipline of repetition, he unwrapped a scroll and began to read. The faint light of a small oil lamp flickered as the sky began to pale. Beyond the post house, the scent of barley porridge drifted from a blackened pot near the stables. A stable boy stirred it lazily, the long wooden ladle scraping the bottom of the pot with each rotation. Nearby, a tired caravan slept. Camels curled beneath their loads. A single dog stretched beside a heap of saddle blankets. The postmaster, a stooped man with the weight of decades in his gaze, shuffled across the courtyard in soft slippers. He carried a leather pouch, cracked and hardened by time, filled with letters awaiting transit. He didn't hurry. The road was long, and speed was never the point. Letters here waited, sometimes for days, until the next relay of riders arrived. The ink-scented stillness of morning wrapped around the building like a shawl. This was not a place of urgency. It was a place where time gathered in the corners, like wind-blown sand. And in this quiet, the work began. A name was murmured, a brush dipped. One more message joined the long, invisible thread stretching from east to west. By the time the sun reached its peak, the sky had turned a soft, washed-out blue, with faint streaks of white cloud drifting overhead like silk scarves forgotten in the air. The heat pressed gently against the earth, but it was dry and even. No shimmering mirages, just clarity that stretched for miles. A distant bell sounded, a soft chime followed by the gentle rhythm of hoofbeats across sand-hardened paths. From the mountain pass came the silhouette of two riders. Their horses, lean and long-legged, kicked up puffs of dust as they descended toward the outpost. Inside the post house, no one rushed. The scribe paused his brush in mid-stroke. The postmaster lifted his gaze but did not rise. The stable boy merely adjusted the hanging water sack, letting a thin stream trickle into a wide basin. The riders approached without words, their faces wrapped in cloth to keep out the dust, their saddlebags worn and heavy. One dismounted slowly, stretching limbs stiff from riding. The other reached into a satchel and drew out a bundle of tightly bound scrolls. They were handed over with a nod. Not a word was exchanged, just the shuffle of sandals, the jingle of bridles, the sigh of camels turning their heads. Inside, the scrolls were unwrapped one by one. Some were written in fine Persian script, others in blocky Sogdian, a few with the flowing characters of Chinese clerks. Some bore wax seals, some red cinnabar stamps, and others were knotted in string dyed with saffron. One by one, they were sorted. Some were placed on the table for transcription. Others were tucked into cubbies in the wall. A few were destined to continue westward when the next rider came. The afternoon passed slowly. Shadows crept along the edges of the room. The sound of scratching brushes and the soft murmuring of names filled the air. Outside, the camels drank. The riders slept in the shade of the walls, their arms folded across their chests, their boots beside them. There was no clock. Time passed in silence. As the sun descended and bathed the world in amber, the station took on the smell of evening. Wood smoke from the cook fire, the faint resin of incense burned to keep away flies, and the deep aroma of the riders' spices. Their satchels, now half empty, had carried not only letters but bundles of dried herbs, turmeric, clove, a pinch of cinnamon, tucked alongside scrolls and coin. The scribe lit a second lamp. Its glow warmed the walls, catching the sheen of old ink pots and the gloss of polished wood. He prepared fresh sheets of mulberry paper and dabbed the tip of his brush against a silk blotter. He copied slowly, line by line. Every curve of every character mattered, not just for legibility, but out of respect. Each letter carried stories, trade negotiations, birth announcements, the memory of a mother's voice written by her son's careful hand. Outside, the stable boy brushed the horses. The bristles made a soft, repetitive noise against their dusty coats. The animals blinked slowly, tails swishing at flies. Far in the distance, the first star appeared over the jagged silhouette of the mountains. The riders rose and shared their evening meal. A few rice cakes, strips of dried yak meat, and a pot of warm tea brewed with salt and butter. The postmaster joined them, listening more than he spoke, sipping slowly from a wooden bowl with a crack running along its rim. By twilight, all was settled again. Letters were sorted, scrolls transcribed. The air was thick with the perfume of spices and ink and old parchment. The scribe extinguished his brush in a bowl of clean water, careful not to spill a drop. Outside, the wind picked up just slightly, rustling the edges of the fabric awnings. Inside, the only sound was the crackle of the low fire and the gentle breathing of the men and animals resting in the calmness of a day nearly done. By full dark, the station glowed like a lantern in the vast, ink-blue emptiness of the desert. The stars shimmered overhead, bright and sharp in the dry air. Inside, the quiet remained complete, but the work continued. There were always night scrolls. These were the special messages. Those too urgent to wait until morning, or too secret to be sent in daylight. They came bound in black string, wrapped in plain cloth, sometimes sealed with wax, sometimes marked with symbols unfamiliar to the scribe's old eyes. He unwrapped one such message now. The script was unusual, angular, with flourishes at the ends of each line. He copied it slowly, humming under his breath. The postmaster watched in silence, his fingers steepled under his chin. When the copy was finished, the original was rewrapped, placed into a wooden box, and locked in a chest against the far wall. The copy would travel, tied to the saddle of a rider scheduled to depart just before sunrise. Outside, the desert whispered, not with wind, but with stillness. It was a kind of silence that pressed gently against the ears, as if the world itself were holding its breath. The scribe finished his work and leaned back, stretching his fingers. The stable boy came in to gather the scrolls for the next relay. He moved quietly, cradling them like sleeping birds. Far beyond the station, unseen dunes shifted softly in the night. The road ahead lay long and uncertain, but the messages would travel. Carried by tired horses, remembered by silent riders, they would pass from hand to hand until they reached the edge of the known world. And in this post house, buried deep in sand and silence, the ink still dried slowly beneath the lamplight. Dawn began not with light, but with sound. A slow clinking of reins, the quiet creak of leather saddles, the heavy snort of horses stirring in the coolness before sunrise. The station was still wrapped in darkness, its thick walls holding the night air inside. But outside, a single lantern swayed gently from the post over the gate, its glow casting golden halos across the courtyard stones. The rider was young, or perhaps only looked that way in the half-light. He stood beside his mount, a short, broad-chested horse with pale gray flanks and weary eyes. The rider adjusted the bundle of scrolls strapped to the saddle, testing the cords and knots with habitual movements, honed not from speed, but from patient repetition. Inside the post house, the scribe had already risen. He moved with less stiffness today, the kind of ease that only came after years of letting silence be his teacher. He handed the final 2 scrolls to the rider without fanfare. No instructions were needed. The roads had their own wisdom. The postmaster remained by the hearth, sipping tea that had gone cold. He didn't speak. There was no need to interrupt the morning with anything so sharp as words. The fire had long since faded to embers, and in its place, the gray of dawn slowly entered the room, like water soaking into fabric. Outside, the desert was a canvas of ash blue, stretching out in every direction. The air was dry and clean, and the sound of hoofbeats soon faded into nothingness. The rider didn't look back. He never did. At the post house, the daily rituals resumed. A new pot of rice was set to steam. The inkstones were cleaned. A single sparrow landed on the roof and chirped once, then was gone. Time resumed its soft unfolding. It was nearly noon when the next caravan appeared, a slow-moving trail of men, mules, and goods winding down from the distant hills. The path they followed had been carved over centuries by hooves and wheels, and its dust rose in lazy spirals behind them. The station came alive in gentle waves. First, the stable boy rose from his shaded corner and untied fresh water skins. Then, the scribe returned from the shaded porch, where he had been dozing with an open scroll across his lap. The postmaster nodded once and went to fetch the large clay jar, the one reserved for boiling tea when guests arrived. The caravan was led by a heavy-bearded man with dark eyes and hands like tree bark. His name wasn't offered, nor was it expected. He handed over a bundle of scrolls tied with green twine and gestured toward the shaded corner where the horses could rest. The scrolls were from the capital, thick with official crests and silk ribbons, the writing crisp and fragrant with the scent of lacquered ink. Each letter had been crafted with precision. Some bore maps drawn in soft red ochre. Others contained inventories, bolts of cloth, weights of lapis and cinnabar, quantities of salt. The scribe's brush moved with renewed energy. This kind of work was more ceremonial, less about words and more about the art of recording. As he wrote, the traders sat nearby, sipping thin barley tea and chewing on salted apricots. Their voices were low and unhurried. One told of a sandstorm near Turpin that had delayed their journey. Another described a new breed of horse being traded further west, broader in the chest, but skittish around bells. In the distance, a group of boys led donkeys to a small well. The animals drank slowly, their ears flicking flies away. A pale haze drifted over the hills, turning the mountains into soft outlines. Inside, the scent of ink and parchment mingled with spice and sweat. The work was steady. No one rushed. There was always enough time here. Deep inside the post house, past the living quarters and behind a narrow doorway, there was a small chamber known simply as the scroll room. It was the heart of the station, a place of quiet memory, where the past lingered not in stories, but in bundles of faded writing. The room was dim, lit only by a slit of afternoon sun that fell in a long stripe across the floor. On the walls were wooden shelves, each divided into narrow compartments. Within them, scrolls rested, some carefully labeled, others long since unread. The scribe entered with his arms full. He moved with reverence, setting down the fresh bundle of scrolls copied from the day's arrivals. His fingers traced over the silk strings of older messages, some untouched for years. This room held letters from dead kings, forgotten merchants, lost sons. Their words still rested here, tied in neat bows or sealed with crumbling wax. Some were destined never to be delivered, their recipients lost to time or war or the slow shifting of borders. There was one scroll, tied with gold thread, that no one dared move. It had been there before the scribe's time, before the postmaster's time. No one remembered what it said, only that it must remain undisturbed. In this space, silence was not just background. It was language. The dust on the shelves, the weight of the air, the smell of cedar wood and old paper, all of it spoke of a patience that outlasted memory. The scribe added the new scrolls, labeling them in ink that would dry before evening. He sat for a moment afterward, cross-legged on the floor, listening to the slow creak of the building around him. No voices reached here. Only the faintest rustle of wind, perhaps a rat scurrying in the eaves, and the ever-present sense that time was being gently folded, like parchment, over and over again. Night returned softly, as it always did. A thin crescent moon hung low in the sky, like a half-closed eye watching over the land. The stars followed slowly, each one appearing as if painted on by a patient hand. From the south, a flicker of torchlight shimmered in the dark. A lone figure approached the station on foot, a runner, not a rider. His robe was damp with sweat, and dust clung to every crease of cloth. He carried no weapon, only a leather pouch tied close to his chest. The gate creaked open, and the postmaster met him with a silent nod. No questions were asked. Runners often bore messages of importance, or secrecy, or sorrow. Their arrival was never loud. Inside, the scribe lit a fresh lamp, its flame steady and small. He took the runner's pouch with both hands and opened it gently. Inside were 2 short scrolls, still warm from the heat of the man's body. The script was hurried, the ink smudged in places. One was addressed to a monastery in the hills. The other bore no name, just a symbol, inked in red. These were copied without delay. The scribe worked in silence, lips moving in time with the brush. The lamp cast long shadows across the table, flickering slightly as a breeze passed under the doorway. The runner was given tea and bread. He sat without speaking, his eyes half closed, breathing slowly and evenly. He would rest until moonset, then be gone before the light returned. Outside, the wind moved over the sand, with a sound like whispering silk. Inside, the post house remained still, a quiet box of warmth and purpose in a sea of night. By the time the scribe laid down his brush, the moon had slipped behind a cloud, and the last torchlight had faded from view. The scrolls, now dry and complete, rested beneath linen cloth. Their journey would continue tomorrow. Morning came gently once more, with pale light trickling over the high dunes and staining the station walls in soft amber. The desert, never quite still but never loud, stretched into a cool hush. A distant line of dust marked the approach of the western relay. This rider came alone. His cloak was draped in layers to shield him from the cold winds of the steppe, and his horse bore the signs of long travel. Flanks stained with sweat, hooves wrapped in protective cloth. The saddle, cracked at the corners, had been patched with care using a strip of goat hide. He carried only a few scrolls, but these were different. Each was sealed with thick wax in dark reds and greens, stamped with crests unfamiliar even to the seasoned postmaster. One was wrapped in black lacquered paper, a message from a court or council, likely written by a hand not used to wind and dust. When the scrolls were passed inside, the scribe did not begin work immediately. First, he laid them on a tray of warmed stones, allowing the desert chill to dissipate before handling the brittle wax. He prepared his ink carefully, grinding it with a few drops of water from the brass jug reserved for such work. Each seal was examined, drawn into the record with exacting care. Not broken, not yet. Some scrolls were meant to be carried further, untouched, to outposts deeper in the sands or along the mountain trade roads. One scroll was opened, gently. It held a brief message, perhaps 12 words, written in plain Turkic script, requesting a change of caravan routes due to flash floods along the Talas River. The ink was dark, the message simple, but its impact might ripple through dozens of way stations. Outside, the rider sat in silence. He chewed dried dates and leaned against the cool stone wall, his eyes closed to the sun. He would leave again that night. His horse rested, his water skins refilled. In the meantime, his presence folded into the rhythm of the place. Another figure shaped by the road, by silence, by endless wind. Inside, the scribe returned to his brush. The strokes came slow, careful, unhurried. The record of the world continued to unfurl, line by line. It was during a lull in travel, a span of 3 days without riders or couriers, when the station received a most unusual delivery. A wandering cartographer arrived on foot. His clothing was plain but meticulously kept, and he wore a broad-brimmed hat that shielded his face from the desert glare. Over his shoulder, he carried a cylindrical case made of polished wood, secured by bronze clasps shaped like crane wings. The postmaster offered him water, and the scribe cleared the work table. From the case, the cartographer withdrew a long scroll, not of writing, but of lines. Inked pathways, rivers, mountains, and forgotten tracks stretched across the parchment like the threads of a loom. There were no names, no titles. Just topography rendered with a quiet, obsessive precision. He had come not to send the map, but to compare it. From the storage room, the postmaster retrieved a parcel sealed years ago. Another map, drawn by a different hand. The two were unfurled side by side. The cartographer said nothing as he worked. He examined each bend in the river, each slope in the hills, every misaligned crossroad. Occasionally, he would reach for the scribe's brush and mark an adjustment. A slight correction to a pass, a note on the movement of dunes, a symbol indicating that a stream had long since run dry. The scribe observed, recording the changes in his quiet script. For a long time, no one spoke. Outside, the wind stirred the dust. Inside, the light from the narrow window moved across the table like a slow sundial. When the cartographer finished, he sealed both scrolls again. One would remain here, archived with the others in the scroll room. The other would travel with him eastward, to another post where other hands would repeat the process. He left at dusk, disappearing into the amber light with the same quiet he had arrived with. The post house settled back into its silence, now carrying just a little more knowledge of the ever-shifting world outside its walls. The next arrival came not by caravan, nor on horseback, but quietly, on foot. A scholar wrapped in layers of faded robes, his beard touched with white, his eyes blinking through thin lenses made of polished glass. He had come not to deliver letters, but to study them. With the postmaster's permission, he entered the scroll room. His fingers traced the old bundles tied with discolored silk, the messages left behind, unread for years. His voice, when he spoke, was a whisper, as if raising it would disturb the slumber of the parchment. The scholar brought out a small notebook of pressed cotton paper and opened it across his knees. He began comparing glyphs from old Sogdian scripts, piecing together fragments of forgotten merchant codes, tracing characters that had once directed caravans to water, shelter, safety. He spent the evening by lamplight, reading aloud in quiet rhythm, then copying, then falling into stillness again. At one point, he removed a broken seal from a scroll and held it in his palm for a long while. "This one came from Kashgar," he murmured. "Maybe the year 860. The scribe offered tea. The scholar accepted without looking up. The postmaster sat nearby, slowly cleaning the curved blade of his paper knife, its edge long dulled from years of gentle use. The scholar did not ask for a place to sleep. When night deepened, he curled on a woven mat beneath the scroll shelves and closed his eyes beneath the rhythm of crickets chirping through the thin window slit. He would leave before sunrise. But the traces of his visit, a few new notes, a translated passage, a dusted-off symbol, would remain in the records, quiet additions to the soft, murmured legacy of the post house. There were some nights when nothing arrived. No runners, no riders, no caravans from the hills. Just the breathing of horses in the stable and the low creak of the wind passing through the doorway curtain. On these nights, the post house exhaled. The scribe set down his brush early. The inkstone was washed and left to dry. The scrolls, already transcribed and sealed, lay stacked in neat rows beneath a strip of linen. The lamp was turned down low, casting the room in an amber hush. Outside, the stars crowded the sky in gentle waves. The moon was full and soft-edged. A dog somewhere in the distance gave a single, lazy bark, more from habit than alarm. The postmaster sat beneath the gate arch, sipping warm tea from a ceramic bowl. The stable boy slept near the animals, curled beneath a woolen blanket. The horses shifted once, then stilled again. There was nothing to do now but wait. The letters were resting. The road was sleeping. Time, which always moved, seemed to lean into stillness. And so the post house breathed, slowly, deeply, without worry. Because here, on the long arm of the Silk Road, messages would always come. Riders would always arrive. Scrolls would always need copying. But not tonight. Tonight was for quiet, for the settling of dust, for the cooling of ink, for stories that had already been told, already written, already packed in the saddlebags of someone far away. The station stood in the silence, cradled by dunes, embraced by night. And inside, beneath the lamplight, the letters slept.